Fool Answers. I'm Alison Southwick, and I'm joined as always by Robert Brokamp, personal finance expert here at the Motley Fool.
Hi.
In this week's episode, it's the next in our series for tackling big life events, and this time we're going to talk about tips for an amicable divorce with Motley Fool wealth planner Amanda Kish. All that and more on this week's episode of Motley Fool Answers. So, bro, what's up?
Well, Alison, last week we discussed the high prices of prescription drugs with Lee Purvis of AARP, and one takeaway from that was better save a lot of money so you can afford to cover all that.
Drugs are too damn high.
That's right. But there are some other ways to at least try to limit the cost of that, and that is be in good shape so you reduce the chances that you need any medications or medical care. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit for our What's Up Bro this week. And I'm going to talk first of all about an article by Paul Brandis on MarketWatch.com with the excellent subhead, Want to Retire Well? Your personal trainer may be as important as your financial advisor. So he included a couple of examples of folks who try to stay in shape. Here's the workout followed by Joyce Field, who 3 days a week does this. So she has a 30-minute warm-up. She does cross-trainer machine, ab exercise, stretches, wall push-ups. Then comes Johnny the trainer, and they do mountain climbers, resistant bands, weight machines, squats, and burpees. And then she closes with 3 reps of 60-second planks with a 45-pound weight on her back. You know, want to know how old Joyce is?
Oh, old enough to make me feel really bad about myself.
86 years old.
Good for her.
When did she begin doing all this? When she was 78.
Oh, wow.
Right. Oh, another fun fact from that article. The number of people aged 70 and older who are doing triathlons, it's the biking, running, and swimming, it's up 168% since 2009. Pretty impressive. So it's never too late to start. And there are plenty of studies that back this up, including one from last summer by Gretchen Reynolds of the New York Times. She highlighted this in her article. Exercise makes the aging heart more youthful. And so basically what this study did was take a bunch of sedentary middle-aged people, run them through various exercises 4 or 5 times a week. One of those sessions was strenuous, but otherwise it was pretty easy, mostly just walking around, things like that. Sure enough, after 2 years, the exercises were in better shape. Specifically, and here's the quote from the article, the left ventricles in the exercises' heart muscles were stronger and less stiff than at the start of the study. Their hearts, in effect, were more youthful now, even though they really hadn't done much exercise up to that point. So that's very encouraging. But a more recent article by Reynolds showed that how much the benefits of exercise last even after you've stopped exercising. And she basically discussed a study that was published in April that revisited a study that ended in 2003. So go back to 2003. And this study took people between the ages of 40 and 60. They were all overweight. They were all basically sedentary. Broke them into 3 groups. The control group did nothing. One group that did moderate exercise, mostly walking and things like that, and then another group did more vigorous exercise, similar to jogging. After 8 months of doing these things, you can guess what happened, of course. The people who were doing some exercise were better on all kinds of factors, such as aerobic fitness, blood pressure, insulin sensitivity, and waist circumference. But the recent study basically went back to these people a decade later and said, would you like to do a little reunion study? And there were more than 100 of them and said, yes, let's do it. So they looked at these people. Some of them continued to exercise. A lot of them didn't. But those from the control group, the folks who did nothing, just basically got worse. Most had lost about 10% of their aerobic capacity, which is typical. Apparently, after age 40, we lose about 1% of our fitness annually. How depressing is that? But those men and women who had exercised vigorously for 8 months retained substantially more fitness. And this is 10 years after the study.
Crazy.
On average, the aerobic capacity had fallen only about 5% compared to when they had joined the study. And those few who were still exercising 4 times a week, they were in better shape today than they were more than a decade ago when they started the study.
Wow, even though they're 10 years older.
Yes. The walkers in the study from the early 2000s lost about as much aerobic capacity as the control group, but on measures of metabolic health, they were still in better shape, and that is stuff like blood pressure, insulin sensitivity, things like that. So in the words of Dr. William Krause, professor of medicine and cardiology at Duke, who oversaw this new study, he said, exercise is a powerful modulator of health, and some effects can be quite enduring. And that, Alison, is what's up.
So yes, it's time once again for the next in our series of tackling major money life events. And so today we are joined by Amanda Kish. She is a financial planner with Motley Fool Wealth Management.
Oh, a sister company, the Motley Fool.
I thought you'd be ready for that.
I don't know. I was going to comment that Amanda is like one of the most qualified people at the Motley Fool because she's not only a CFP, but a CFA as well. And I think you're the only one at the company who has both those designations, right?
I think there's one other person.
Really? What's the difference?
We're a rare breed.
CFP is all the financial planning stuff. Difficult. Take a series of classes, but one hard exam. CFA, man, that's 3 exams. And that level 2 is tough.
Brutal.
Yeah.
Are you not a CFA?
No, I'm just a regular old CFP.
Oh, why do we even have you on this show?
I know. I just
move over.
Eye candy. I think that's the only reason.
Yeah, that's the reason.
She laughs at that.
Well, Amanda, thank you for joining us. So we already got a little bit of your bio, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about how you came to be a planner with the Motley Fool? Because you've been with the Motley Fool for a while in different capacities.
Yes, so I've been with the Fool in various capacities for about 12 years. So after I got my MBA in finance, I started off working at an asset management firm in the Rochester area. Then I started out here as a writer, started taking over the Champion Funds investment newsletter many years ago. I worked with Bro on Rule Your Retirement for many years. And then 4 years ago, I transitioned over to Motley Fool Wealth Management as a planner. So that's what I've been doing ever since. So I wear many hats.
And she's also the latest member of our 401k committee. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you so much.
Is there like some secret initiation that happens or anything
secret.
like that? Yeah.
What happens on the 401k committee stays in the 401k committee.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we have asked you to come in and help tackle the topic of divorce. And particularly, you're going to walk us through as much as possible how to have an amicable divorce. And you are going to be speaking a bit from personal experience, but also from your experience as a planner.
Exactly. So what I'm going to talk about are my 5 top tips for having an amicable divorce. I'll preface this, I'm not a lawyer, so these are just my experiences, again, as you said, personal, and my experience from my financial planning work. So the top tip that I would start off with would be to remember that more than anything, your divorce is a business transaction. So really you need to think of it as a business partnership that you are unwinding, that just didn't work out. So it's very important to keep the emotion out of it. It's a difficult shift for some people, but when you're talking about the divorce proceedings, you need to recognize that now your spouse very likely no longer has your best interest in mind. So you really need to be your own advocate and be present in the entire process. If you have a lawyer, certainly that's someone that's going to be able to advocate for you. But you need to be there. You need to be fully present in order to let your lawyer do his or her best job. Some mistakes that I have seen people make in the divorce process is letting those emotions get involved and letting that cloud their judgment as far as the whole business part of it goes. I've seen cases where a client would say, I'm tired of fighting. I don't care. Let her take what she wants. I don't want to deal with this. I just want to get this done as quickly as possible. I don't care whatever it costs, whatever it takes. I've seen cases where someone has said, taking the attitude of, he's more concerned about the money. I'm not that selfish, so I'm not going to fight him because, I'm a better person and, I'm going to be more noble and suffer. And those are both reasonable defense mechanisms, I guess, and ways of coping, but they don't help with the ultimate business of coming to the table and negotiating for what's in your best interest. So it's best to keep that clarity.
Does it help to go see a therapist in a way so you're like, okay, this is my money side, but I also need to take care of my emotional side, and maybe I can work out some of that emotion with a therapist to leave me a little bit more clearer when I'm dealing with my lawyer, for example.
Yep, and that's actually one of my points for later on is dealing with the emotional side, so you can be a little bit more present for dealing with the financial side of things.
Yeah, and that's sometimes difficult advice to follow because it can be such an emotionally draining experience that you might be tempted to just I just want to get this over with as soon as possible. In my parents' case, their divorce was prompted by also my dad's business failing. So there were all kinds of things going on, and I've seen that in other divorces as well. There's something else going on that sort of is sort of the, if not the straw, is the straw or the bale that breaks the camel's back that brings the marriage to an end. So it's often not just the divorce that's happening. So it's so much turmoil, and people are like, I just want to get this done. Then years later, you realize, I wish I didn't rush that.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't get a do-over, so you do want to take your time and make sure that you're making decisions that are right, not only in the near term but in the long term. So a lot of folks look at it and say, what do I need to do in the next couple of weeks or months to get to D-Day when I sign the papers, and not necessarily thinking about, how is that going to affect you 10 or 20 years down the road. So for an example, if a client may say, I want to keep the house because I want to keep I want stability for my kids. I don't want them to change school districts. He can have everything else. I'm not going to worry about that. That may not be the best decision if you're then stuck with a house that you can't afford and you're draining financial assets to support that. So you need to consider not only now and today and the day after the divorce, but also a decade or two down the road.
So I think when people find themselves facing a divorce, their first reaction is, I need a lawyer. Is that the right reaction?
That is a good thing to think. You may not necessarily need a lawyer, at least to start off with. So that kind of leads into my second point. I would highly recommend exploring all the different options that you have for going through the divorce process. So for example, in my personal experience, when I was divorced, we used a mediator. So basically what the mediator does is they sit down with each party in the room, they hammer out all the details of the separation, splitting up assets, liabilities. Their job is to just make sure that each person's heard, that they come to a fair and equitable agreement. Their role is not to be an advocate for either person or to offer any legal advice. In most cases, they're not a lawyer. So that in our situation, that made sense because our divorce was fairly simple. We didn't have the complication of kids. Most of our finances were not too terribly intertwined, so it was just a question of our primary residence, of how we were going to split that up. We had already decided I would be keeping that, so it was just a question of hammering out how much I was going to pay out. So, when you're talking about a divorce, people's standard of living, it's almost always going to decline, unfortunately. So if there's anything you can do kind of on the front end to mitigate those expenses that you're going to be spending and legal fees, I would recommend doing that. So looking at mediation is one possible way to do that. If you have a more, amicable relationship, things are fairly simple. That's not going to be possible for every person. Your situation is going to be unique. If you have concerns that, there's complicated custody issues or family business, or you're concerned your spouse is hiding assets, then that's where you really want to get a lawyer on board. And I'll also say that even with mediation, you can still employ the services of a lawyer. You can consult with one before, during, after, just to make sure that you understand the law, your rights, you're not missing anything. But then if you find that mediation is not right for you, there's a step above that before you kind of go all, full out shark lawyer. It's a process called collaborative divorce, where each spouse would team up with a lawyer, sit down in a room with the four of them, and work out those same details similar to how you would in mediation. So that's just something that can be a little bit more or a little bit less aggressive and a little bit easier on everybody involved, and can keep some of the costs down if you're not, fighting with each other and worrying about necessarily going to court.
And we talked before the show started about how in Virginia you have to be separated for a year before you can even get officially divorced. You have to be legally separated. And where you're from in New York, you can just go get a divorce. I make that sound much easier than it is, but yes, to oversimplify it. Are most of the laws around divorce set at a state level that you need someone to help you navigate it, or is a mediator still going to be no, I got this, and understanding the laws necessarily? Yes.
So divorce law is state specific, so you will need to know that. A mediator is going to know the laws in the state that they're operating in. Again, they're not a lawyer, but they'll know what needs to be done. In my case, we used a mediator and then looped a lawyer in kind of at the last minute for signing everything. So you'll probably have some contact with a legal professional of some kind. And again, it's never a bad idea to make sure you know what's going on. As we said earlier, you don't get a do-over.
Yeah.
So make sure you understand, everything the first time and get it right.
All right, let's move on to your next point, which is to get everything in writing.
Yes, document. So one of the first things that you'll do when you start the separation process, you're going to want to get a documentation of all of your assets. So you'll be pulling copies of bank accounts, statements, credit card accounts, investment accounts, 401ks, as well as things like a recent year's tax returns, insurance policies, health insurance, deeds for any real estate that you own. And it's important to have a full accounting of everything, to have all the assets, liabilities, and income to be separated out in an equitable manner. And kind of along with that, the aspect of having everything in writing. As you can imagine, when it comes to divorce, when there's money and hard feelings involved, there's definitely room for some shady behavior sometimes, and that whole process can bring out the worst and even the best of people at times. So it really helps to not leave anything vital as just a verbal agreement, so you don't run into troubles later. So whether that's discussing how much money in your checking account each of you are going to take, or where the kids are going to spend their holidays, it's important to have that documented with specifics, dates, dollar amounts, so you don't run into issues or misunderstandings, and I'm using air quotes here, right. for someone, suddenly seeing some assets in a joint checking account disappear because you didn't get that in writing.
And when you say in writing, I mean, that can also just be like an email. I've watched enough Judge Judy to know that an email can actually really change your circumstances.
Yes, it's important to have some kind of documentation that you can fall back on. Obviously, when you're talking about the more formal things, you'll want to get that in a more formalized manner. But yes, having something, even an email, in many cases will suffice.
All right, let's move on to your fourth point, which is to have a divorce makeover.
Woohoo!
Yay, get back out there, hop on Tinder, start swiping.
Yeah, not quite that fun. So it's not a fun queer eye makeover, but a financial divorce makeover. So, when you're married, your financial life is obviously going to be very intertwined with that of your spouse, and that's going to vary from couple to couple. But extracting yourself from that being intertwined does take some work. And I find that there are some things that people tend to do up front, kind of to get, as I said, to the D-Day, logistical things you need to do to finalize everything. But then there's also other things that tend to fall by the wayside that can get pushed off. I'll deal with it later. And you really need to take care of both sets of those items. So kind of the things that you would do along the way, you're going to be opening accounts, bank accounts, investment accounts in your own name. You'll be, keeping an eye on joint accounts, maybe freezing joint accounts during the divorce process to make sure there are no mysterious withdrawals. Closing those joint accounts. If you don't have credit established in your own name, you're going to want to do that as soon as possible. Makes sense to check in on your credit score as well. So those are the kinds of things that people tend to do right away to get the divorce finalized. There are other things that are more important, I think, that people tend to let fall by the wayside, and they can range from very small things. For example, changing your passwords. If you have online banking, once you have all of that separated into individual accounts, you're going to want to change that password, even just your Netflix password. That's something to consider as well. Probably one of the most important things that you'll need to do is update your estate plan. So things like your will, advanced medical directive, power of attorney. If you've got your spouse listed on those documents, you're going to want to make updates. Changing beneficiaries in all of your investment accounts. Any bank accounts that have a transfer on death designation, 401k, IRAs, pensions and annuities. Even if you're not currently collecting them, they're most likely going to have your spouse as a beneficiary. So you're going to want to update that, change that to a child or another family member.
Same with life insurance policies and stuff like that. Yeah, that was
going to be the next words out of my mouth was life insurance to update those beneficiaries. So unless you don't care if your ex-spouse collects, if you kick the bucket, definitely get that updated. And there's also some, consider the tax ramifications of your change in status. So how you're filing taxes is going to change. Most likely you'll have been married filing jointly, and that's going to change to most likely single or head of household. So you may want to review the withholdings on your paycheck with your employer. You may need to file an updated W-4. And also be aware of how you're going to file your taxes. If you have your custody of any children for more than half of the year, you could potentially file as head of household, and that's going to be more advantageous. You'll be taxed a little bit lower rate, higher standard deduction. I know of one individual who divorced, had custody of his children about 75-80% of the time. He worked in finance, so he had always done his family's taxes, continued to do them filing single after the divorce. Eventually, after a couple years, decided to offload that to an accountant, and the accountant said, hey, you could have been filing as head of household this whole time and saving a significant amount on taxes. So, make sure that you have the correct filing status for your updated situation.
All right, and when should you get professional help?
That depends. It's probably never too soon to do that. So kind of as part of the issue of your, divorce makeover, don't be afraid to loop in financial professionals. So you may already have a lawyer that you're working with. Don't be afraid to include an accountant or a financial planner to take a bigger, more comprehensive look at your overall financial picture and importantly, how that's going to change. And there are actually planners out there that have certified divorce financial analyst status. Those are not letters I have after my name, but that those are individuals that are specifically trained in financial matters relating to divorce. So it may make sense to seek out someone with that designation if you have that need.
Because really, divorce changes a lot of things, right? If you had a financial plan while you were married, it was based on all kinds of things like your living expenses, how much you had in your 401k, how much you're going to get from Social Security. Then you get divorced and it's all different, right? Your living expenses have changed. Your retirement assets have probably been split. Social Security, you can get it based on your record or your spouse's record if you've been married for 10 years. So if you haven't been, that changes things too. And if you're going to get a benefit based on your spouse's record, but then you get remarried, that could change things too. So I think seeing a financial professional who knows all the ins and outs of that stuff is very helpful.
Absolutely.
All right, and your final piece of advice, and we touched on this at the top of the show, was to not neglect your emotional well-being as well.
Yes, so this is a non-financial related tip, but I think it kind of loops into the whole holistic idea. And I think that's important to make sure that your emotional side is nourished and taken care of as well. So that's having a good support system in place, whether that's a network of friends and family that can be there for you. And also, I would advocate for potentially talking to a therapist or a counselor. I know some people think there's some kind of stigma on that. I think especially men are more reluctant to seek out that kind of help. But I would encourage anyone, dealing with a divorce, because there's going to be emotions and feelings there. Even in the best of cases and how amicable things are, you're going to have some strong feelings about the whole process. So it really makes sense to have an outlet where you can deal with that, because that kind of loops back into my first point of looking at this as a business transaction. So if you have an outlet where you can process those feelings, deal with those emotions, then you can kind of come to the negotiating table and deal with lawyers, deal with your spouse a little bit more logically and clear-headed. Divorce is always going to be difficult in some way, but there are steps you can take to make it a little bit easier, a little bit more humane on everyone involved, and hopefully come through the other end as unscathed emotionally and financially as possible.
Yeah, here at the Motley Fool, if you are a woman who has gone through a divorce, then it will eventually be your turn to guide another woman here at the Motley Fool through a divorce. It's like this torch that has been passed down for a very long time at the Motley Fool, and they all use the same lawyer, and it all works, and they're all here for each other. It's a sign of how close this company is that we're all like, yes, we're on your team. Yeah. Your coworkers are here for you. All right. So where should people go for more information?
There are a lot of online resources. A couple things I would recommend. If you are looking for a lawyer, a good place for referrals would be your state and local bar association. They might be able to provide some good recommendations. I mentioned earlier there's certified divorce financial analyst. So the Institute for Divorce Financial Analysts is the institution that heads up that designation. So you can find them online at institutedfa.com. And one other resource that I found useful, and I think other people found useful in doing my research, is a book called Crazy Time: Surviving Divorce and Building a New Life by Abigail Trafford. Again, take everything with a grain of salt. Your situation is going to be unique, but I think this is one book that lets you know that you're not alone. What you have dealt with, other people have dealt with as well, and it's definitely, I think, a good resource for a lot of people in the process.
All right, Amanda, thank you so much for joining us. But I want you to stick around because you talked to us about how to have an amicable divorce, and I'm going to talk about a very unamicable divorce. Our sister company, Motley Fool Wealth Management, is a registered investment advisor that can help put your financial plan and investing needs in the context of your big life transitions. If you've enjoyed learning from Amanda or the other Motley Fool Wealth Management planners we've had on the show, guess what? You can get more of them in your life. Visit foolwealth.com/radio. At foolwealth.com/radio, you can find podcast notes and resources and even book a no-obligation appointment with Amanda or another planner you've probably heard on the show. Please consider the risk, costs, and suitability of investments before choosing any investment professionals. All investments involve risk and may lose money. Motley Fool Wealth Management does not guarantee the results of any of its advice or account management. All right, so Amanda, you offered advice on how to have an amicable split up. And so while I was researching what should we do for our fun segment, and by fun, it's like, oh, we're talking about divorce, so how much fun can we really have here? But I stumbled across this insane story of Kirk Kerkorian, the billionaire, and his wife, Lisa Bonder. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not at all.
Great. So we're going to see how well you can guess. Rick, do you want to make guesses too?
We'll see.
Okay, here we go. All right, so Kirk Kerkorian, and I think I'm saying his name right, is truly a self-made man. He was born to poor Armenian immigrants. He dropped out of school in 8th grade. He eventually became a pilot and later a savvy businessman. How savvy? Well, he made his billions, most notably through the company MGM. He was basically a Las Vegas hotel magnate, and he was known as the king of the Las Vegas Strip. So, kind of a big deal. Of course, and then MGM also is a studio. He was a very avid tennis player. And so it was on the courts that in 1986, he met Lisa Bonder, a pro tennis player, and he convinced her to leave her husband. So for more than 10 years, she was his companion, but he refused to marry her, saying that he was happily unmarried. But then things changed. Lisa told Kerkorian that she was pregnant and that he was the father. But he had his doubts. Why was that?
He had a vasectomy.
Ooh, that's a good guess.
It was before the days of the little blue pill. I don't know.
So while Lisa was in her 30s, he was 48 years older. And at 81 years old, he figured his swimmers had long stopped swimming. But he kept quiet about it. Kerkorian was still reticent to get married, but he finally gave in after Lisa said she wanted to legitimize the child. He said, okay, we can get married, but on one condition. What was it?
Well, I'm going to say prenup, but that's too boring.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. She stopped playing tennis.
Oh. He said, yes, we can get married on one condition, that we get divorced in 28 days and you waive all spousal support.
What?
So kind of a prenup. But he's like, yeah, we'll get married, but we're getting divorced 28 days later.
That's like a pre-divorce or something.
Yeah. So baby Kira was born in May. Kerkorian and Bonder were married in August and then divorced 28 days later. So Lisa Bonder wasn't going to get any spousal support, but think about the baby. She took Kerkorian to court asking for $320,000 a month in child support, or $3.8 million a year, to keep Kira in the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to in her 3 short years on Earth. At the time, this was by far a new record in child support. What kind of lifestyle, you ask? Well, for example, for Kira's first birthday at the Hotel Bel Air, it cost $70,000 for how many guests?
500.
501.
3.
Rick was closer. 50.
What?
That was it. 20 kids and 30 adults. A $70,000 birthday party.
Cow.
Can I just take the money and
Wow.
for real? All right, so how does a 3-year-old spend $320,000 a month anyway? According to documents filed by Lisa Bonder with the court, put these in order of expense from highest to lowest. Toys, travel, pets. What order? Most highest expense to lowest.
I want to say pets is number 1, but I'm going to go with travel, toys, and pets.
All right, I'll do something different. I'll say toys, pets, travel.
Pets, travel, toys.
There we go. Well, bro was right. The baby, the 3-year-old, needed $144,000 a month for travel.
Ay, ay, ay.
For toys, just $1,000, and $436 for bunnies and other pets. What about all the other money? Well, $14,000 a month for parties and playdates, $7,000 for charity. This is a very philanthropic 3-year-old.
What a good kid.
$4,300 for food, plus another $5,900 to eat out, $2,500 for movies and other outings, $1,400 for laundry and cleaning. So yeah, the judge granted her $50,000 a month. So not exactly what she asked for, but still, that's
pretty nice.
That's not bad. From what I can tell, she kept coming back for more and taking him to court regularly, later asking for $100,000 a month. And eventually, Kerkorian's lawyer decided to get creative in figuring out the truth of the kid's paternity by hiring a private investigator named Anthony Pellicano.
Sure.
He was known as the Hollywood Fixer. So Kerkorian suspected that the real father was a film producer named Steve Bing. So Pellicano wiretapped Lisa's phones and even went so far as to steal dental floss from Bing's hotel trash can. Pellicano later went to prison for 3 years for doing this and other illegal stuff for celebrities, including Steven Seagal. Anyway, it turns out Bing was the father. But in an ironic turn, he had also paid the PI, Anthony Pellicano, over $300,000 to figure out if he was the father of what British actress models, yeah, baby. That's my hint for you.
Well, so it's Austin Powers, so it's... I can't remember her name. I know, I can visualize her. I can't remember her name. And she's still in great shape.
She's
drawing a blank.
woman. No one remembers her name? Elizabeth Hurley.
There you go. Hugh
Yeah.
Grant's old flame.
Yeah, so this guy paid, so the same PI that was investigating him to find out if he was Kerkorian's actual baby daddy was actually paying the same PI to figure out who Elizabeth Hurley's real baby daddy was. He was the baby's daddy in both cases.
Wow.
So weird, right? Okay. Whew, what a ride. So, where are they all today? Well, Kerkorian died in 2015, just 9 days after his 98th birthday. He bequeathed most of his $1 billion estate to charity. Not nice.
Yeah.
Despite his death, his child support battle waged on. Kira turned 18 a year after his death and was set to receive a $7 million trust fund, even though they already established that she wasn't his kid. But whatever, she sued, and then she received another $1.5 million on top of the $7 million. No idea why. Again, not his kid. We didn't even get to talk around about Kerkorian's fourth wife. Yes, that's right. He got married in 2014, a year before his death. Their marriage lasted 57 days. And this woman was set to receive about $10 million, but she sued for more, settling for about $12.5 million. And I don't know what the moral of the story is. It's just crazy, right? I mean, all of these people just suing each other for money and being miserable for decades. I mean, this fight went on for decades and decades and decades. So maybe the moral is just don't be a billionaire? I don't know. Priorities.
Yeah.
Choose your spouses carefully.
I think that is the lesson. Many wealthy people, when they're asked, what's the number one piece of advice, somewhere in the top 5 is make sure you get the right spouse. Makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, there you go. All right. So you guys did kind of okay on guessing the facts of that story, but it was a little crazy.
It was.
It was a little crazy.
Yeah.
That's a Lifetime TV movie.
And then you're suddenly like, Steven Seagal's in this? What? What? Where's this going? It's crazy. All right. Well, that's the show. Amanda, thank you again for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
The show is edited Amicably.
That's
by
what I was going to
Brokamp.
suggest.
Our email is answers@fool.com. Again, if you want to learn more about Motley Fool Wealth, you can head to foolwealth.com/radio. For Robert Brokamp and Amanda Kish, I'm Alison Southwick. Stay foolish, everybody.